Hello everybody, welcome back to another video on my channel. Today we have an amazing guest with me. This is my friend Hailey.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Girl, I knew when I had this idea, I was like, I gotta text Hailey. I was like, she'll be down to do this. She'll be down. So I was inspired by a 5-year-old Jenna and Julian podcast where they were reading spooky stories, and I was like, it got me in the mood. I was like, I want to read some spooky stories for Halloween. So we both grabbed a couple, and we're just gonna read them, and so like get in the dark somewhere, cozy up, maybe don't turn off the lights. I don't know, we'll see how spooky this gets. But we're just gonna go back and forth sharing some fun stories, and it's gonna be a good time to get us in the mood because I'm gonna post this on Halloween. So if you're seeing this, happy Halloween. But if you want to check out Hailey, I'll have some links to her socials in the description, okay? Because she's like a cool like yoga roller skater artist. So like just like pretty swag.
Thank you.
All right. Real question though. Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
That is a really good question.
We could just rock, paper, scissors, and whoever wins goes first. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Oh, there we go. All right, Hailey's gonna go first.
Finally. All right. So my story is called Tales of Marlow, Pennsylvania. And this is by the Old Stag off of Reddit.
Ooh.
And it goes like this. So, February 28th, 1793. Something strange takes up residence in the dilapidated mill near Beaver River. It begins to dig. April 5th, 1793. 5-year-old Abigail Thatcher picks wild berries with her mother on the border of their farm. Her mother, Joanna, pricks her thumb on pricks her thumb on a thorn. She is distracted for only a moment, but it is long enough for Abigail to somehow wander off. They search for days, but they never find her. September 28, 1793. Samuel Carpenter enters the tavern after sundown in a state of great distress. He is given a bracing shot of whiskey, and after he calms down, tells his story. He had entered the woods late that afternoon to hunt. He'd been at it for a few hours when he saw a magnificent stag lope off around a bend. He stalked it, and when he turned and leveled his rifle, he saw a woman that stood 12 feet tall, as clear as day before him. He said that she was as thin as a birch and covered with dead, naked branches and what could have been straw, like a scarecrow. The woman noticed Samuel and loomed down over him, her long, slack face coming as close as spitting distance, before he turned and ran without looking back. The patrons of the tavern laughed heartily at his story, all except for Jasper Aldridge. He had seen the woman too. October 13th, 1793. For approximately 1 minute, the area around the dilapidated mill near Beaver River falls completely silent and still. There is nobody around to witness it. October 14th, 1793. Mary Thomas, 12 years old, is awoken in the night to the sound of pecking at her window. When she investigates, she finds a crow perched upon the sill. To her amazement, it speaks to her in a comically high-pitched voice, asking to be let in for warmth and soft pillows. Mary cannot say why, but this talking crow fills her with utter revulsion, and she rushes to bed and hides under the covers. It was well that she did, for in the darkness she could not see what the crow was attached to. The next morning the crow is gone, and Mary decides that it was just a dream. She then realizes her bedclothes are covered in blood and that she has become a woman. November 4th, 1793. A slave belonging to the Thatcher family returns from town with supplies and finds a curious object propped up against a tree on his path home. It is a child-sized wooden doll. He recognizes the clothing it is dressed in as belonging to the little Abigail Thatcher, who has been missing for over 6 months. The doll's painted face is chipped and worn, but its expression of delight is plainly visible. They find chocolate in its mouth. June 30th, 1794. The body of Jasper Aldridge is fished out of a pond 6 miles from Marlow. He was found by a troop of Shawnee trappers, who reported the body but do not help to recover it. His eyes are bulging and point in different directions. His teeth are missing. March 20th, 1795. Wesley Braver is to be executed. At the time of his death, a large hawk perches atop the gallows he is hung from and stares out at all gathered. Mary Thomas, now betrothed, watches from the crowd. She feels an acute discomfort at the bird's gaze. Others feel the same, as it takes several days for anyone to work up the nerve to cut Braver's body down. The gallows are dismantled over a week later, for that's how long it takes for the hawk to starve. Nobody seems to remember that any of this happened. August 14th, 1796. George Altgeld closes his general store. He reflects that most of the goods he sold were paid for, if not outright provided by, the traveling Shawnee that came through town. No Shawnee had traveled through Marlow for well over 2 years. December 25th, 1796. Tens of thousands of voices scream out in unified agony from the dilapidated mill near Beaver River. It cannot be heard in Marlow, 3 miles away, over the sounds of their Christmas celebrations. January 7th, 1797. Caleb Martin and his wife Elizabeth watch from across the street as strange lights shine from Samuel Carpenter's home. After nearly 2 hours, Samuel calmly walks from his house and not but his bedclothes and head towards the woods. By the time Caleb is able to dress for the cold and follow his neighbor, Samuel is gone. He is never seen again. July 18th, 1801. Mary Thomas has a child of her own, a boy she named David. David races to meet her in the garden and tells her that a large owl has taken roost in the Thatcher's barn. Mary does not know why, but she forbids her son from ever entering that barn again. Thankfully, her son will keep this promise. Years later, her grandson will not. April 5th, 1813. Joanna Thatcher and her husband John are visited by their daughter. She raps at their door all night, crying and begging to be let in out of the cold. They do not open the door. 20 years have passed, and Joanna and John have grown old, but the voice of their Abigail is still like that of a 5-year-old. The neighbors bar their doors as well. One that peeks out his window and sees what is really knocking at their door never speaks again.
That's
a lot of mystery.
Dude, no, that's a great... I was getting chills. Like, dude... No, whenever, like, first of all, the girl was like, I don't know why I was discomforted by that crow that, like, talked like a woman outside my window. If a crow was like, let me in, I want to lay on your pillows, I'd be like, you're a demon. That was too many words. Get out of here. Also, no, I got chills when they were like, their freaking 5-year-old daughter, even though it's been like 20 years since she was 5 and she went missing, is like, let me in, I'm cold. I'm like, that's a demon. That's just another, that's some sort of fucked up shit. No, thank you.
Yeah, like, and to me, like, the thing that chilled me the most was how it read, like, journal entries. Yeah. It kind of, like, it was dated, and then some of the just, like, very short logs would end with something so haunting and, like, mysterious. Like, why would that happen?
What's crazy is I like how that was formatted, because it kind of lets you make your own story about what could be going on. You're like, okay, the Shawnee haven't been there in 2 years. That's suspect. They knew something was happening. Like, the fact that they were just casually having a Christmas celebration and no one knows there was like 1,000 screams that way, like, fucked up. Fucked up. Oh my God. I was just like, no thank you. All right. This story, I really liked this story. All right, let's see. Boop, 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 boop. All right. So this is an anonymous posting on 4chan, and it's just a bunch of screenshots of it. So we don't know who the original person was, but it was from 2013. So they said, I've never told this story to anyone, and I don't really intend to tell it again. I have a pounding migraine today, and this thread has kept me good company as I've drifted in and out. I don't really like talking about this time in my life, but I want to contribute. When I was 10 to 12, I lived with my mother. We lived below poverty level poor. We lived up in the mountains around Santa Cruz, California. My mother had a friend that owned a large bit of property up there, and he let us stay in a trailer up there. Our trailer was very small and was right beside a garden. A chain-link fence ran around the garden to keep the dog the owner had out, along with other animals. Deers and thing are very common in the area, and also inside the fence was a single room. It was built like a tiny house, but there was only one room on the inside. This room had electricity, and since our actual trailer didn't, I spent a lot of time in that room because I was super into video games. There was one thing you should know right now. The small fenced-in area was only a very small portion of the property, but most of it was heavily forested. Also, I refused to leave the fenced-in area because the owner's dog had been mistreated by children in the past and was very sketchy towards me all the time. If I was alone, it would bite at me, even through the fence. The fence was tall, at least 7 feet high, and it wasn't movable, so as long as the gate was closed, I was safe. That said, it was a tiny bit of the property, and there was no one else around for miles and miles. Now, I tell you all this because I think it's important you understand what kind of scene this was before I really get into the story. We have a fenced-in location that seems fairly safe. It contains a trailer and a single room with power that is not connected to the trailer. Nothing else is around for miles. My mom's van is parked out in front of the gate to the fenced-in area, and a single unpaved road runs from the garden for about a mile back to the main house. Now then, I brought my friend up there to sleep over here and there. We all thought it was pretty cool, like camping out. Besides, we would get our own room to stay in, to play video games all night long. It was like a dream come true. The downside was simple. When it got dark out, it got really dark out. No city around, and the trailer would not be lit up. There was no bathroom to use in the room, so you'd have to walk through the dark garden in order to get to the trailer to use it. Odd things happened out here from time to time. It was always something that could be somewhat easily explained away, though. Noises like people working at night sometimes. Or once, me and a friend were sitting out in the garden, and we saw a shadow as big as a small bear bound up a tree. But the tree didn't shake like there was weight on it. The dog also creeped me out, but angry dog, and I was a kid. It happens. Now, I'm a scaredy cat. I always have been. To be honest, I don't even know why. But I have trouble walking through the lit house, even if I'm all alone. My friends, however, tend to be more outgoing, just the kind of people I get along with. This time I had a friend over, his name was Jacob. We were staying up all night playing Sonic the Hedgehog 3 on my Sega Genesis on a ratty old television. We started playing as the sun went down, and by the time we were finishing up the game, it was about 2 a.m. That's when we heard it. We turned off the game, getting ready to find something else to play, but there was a rumbling in the woods behind the room we were in, like somebody was rolling something really heavy around. We hadn't heard it before because the noise from the game we were playing was loud. Immediately I had goosebumps. Jacob was not really worried about it, but it's not like there was someone else's house or yard right over there. It was forest for miles, and it sounded like someone was constructing something, dragging or rolling something really big. Eventually, Jacob convinced me to play some more games. I agree on the condition that we turn the volume down so that we can hear if something else happens. We started playing, and I didn't even notice the noise stop because I was getting engrossed. A couple hours later, Jacob said he had to use the bathroom. I was feeling fine by then, so I was fine when he left to the trailer to relieve himself. He was taking a while, so eventually I decided to go check on him. Besides, I could use the bathroom and grab a snack while I was at it. I opened the door to leave, and he was just standing at the doorway, right outside the door facing it. Scared the shit out of me. I asked him what he was doing, and he just stood there, blocking the exit. I realized he must have sneaked up to the door because I could hear him walking away from the room, but I hadn't heard him walk back. It was super quiet out there without the noises of the city. I should have been able to hear him walk back. He refused to say anything or respond. He just stood there. I told him he was really creeping me out, but it was not unlike him to try and scare me like this. Finally, I decided to just go to the trailer and use the bathroom myself, partially because I knew my mother was asleep in there. I told him what I was doing, and then I moved past him. When I pushed him out of the way a little, his skin was freezing to the touch. I jumped a bit, but it was a cold night, and he'd been standing out there for like 30 minutes, so I figured that was to be expected. I walked as quick as I could over to the trailer. He followed me, like right on my tail. It was unnerving. I joked a little, saying that he already surprised me by scaring me at the door. The joke is over already. Finally, I got to the trailer and walked in. He didn't follow, just stayed in the doorway. I checked on my mom, who was fast asleep, and then turned to go into the bathroom. Now, it being a porta potty, we keep the bathroom door shut because, well, it smells bad. When I reach for the door and try to open it, though, it's locked. A nervous voice came from behind the door. I'm in here. I quickly turned to look at Jacob, but the door was still open and there was nothing but pitch black night. I freeze in terror. I would have heard the bathroom door open if he had come in behind me and gone that way while I was checking on my mom. There was no way to do it quietly. It creaks like a motherfucker. I yelped so loudly that my mom woke up startled. I stared at the doorway, unable to bring myself to move a muscle. She got up, walked over there, and looked out. Not seeing anything, she closed the door and asked me what was wrong. By now, Jacob was coming out of the bathroom and acting perfectly normal, but a bit confused. I explained what had happened. Jacob said he was just taking a long time in the bathroom, basically. Neither of them believed me at all, no matter how much I insist. My mom is sure that I just got sleepy and imagined it. Jacob thought I was trying to prank him. So now, my mom gets out a big flashlight and walks us back to the room. She tells us to go to sleep, then leaves and goes back to bed herself. Now, this room doesn't have windows or anything, so after a while, I calm back down. I'm telling myself that my mom was right, I must have been like a waking dream or something, and Jacob insists he was in the bathroom the whole time, and I'm inclined to believe him, because there's just no way to really get around it, to get around outside without being heard. So I settle down, I'm a little rattled, but I'm thinking I can just sleep it off through the night. Suddenly, the dog starts going nuts right behind us. The room is up against the fence, so the dog must have been like right behind the room on the other side of the fence. I felt like I jumped so high, I was surprised I didn't hit the roof. Jacob was laughing at me like, haha, a dog barking at a squirrel or some shit and you're shitting yourself. It keeps going though for a long time. Suddenly, the barking stops and gets replaced by whimpering. We hear the dog run away. About 45 seconds of silence before we hear something new. A small scratching sound on the back wall of the room. We both try to be as silent as we can. Eventually it stops. After 5 or so minutes of silence, Jacob decides to be brave. He insists he is going to go get my mother up, tell her something crazy is going on, and we're gonna go from there. With some kind of divine adult protection, you know? I wish he wouldn't leave me alone, but there was no way I'm going out there. Never, ever. He arms himself as best he can with a tennis racket we had in the room with us. Then he takes a couple of deep breaths and opens the door and dashes out. I close it as quick as I can behind him. It's less than 30 seconds. I hear a scream. Not long after, the door flies open and he comes back in looking pale as a ghost. He's breathing like he just ran a marathon. His eyes look as big as dinner plates. I ask what is going on like 4 times before he finally starts to get words out. He tells me he walked out there, and as he was walking through the garden as quick as he could, he saw my mom, just standing there. He tried to talk to her, but she stared back at him with a blank expression. Getting super creeped out because of what happened to me earlier, he took a couple more steps towards her, telling that he thought something was in the woods. Suddenly, her face turned into an awkward smile. Then he realized something terrible. He hadn't noticed sooner because of the darkness and how much of a hurry he'd been in, but she was on the other side of the fence. Now, the door to this room does not lock, and as I explained earlier, the room has no windows. He had been trying to move stuff in front of the door as he told this story, and by the end I was helping him. In retrospect, whatever was harassing us seemed to be averse to actually entering the room or to the trailer, because the Jacob one didn't come in either time and he could have, and this room was not sturdy. Either way, we stacked everything we could against the door, thinking somehow that like cartoons this would definitely keep the creature out. For the rest of the night we heard scratches coming from all around the room. I cried. Jacob looked like his mind had left his body with fear. At one time I heard it speak too. I heard it from right next to us when I was resting against the wall, in my mother's voice, quietly. The same exact phrasing and intonation she had used earlier in the night. "What's wrong?" Followed immediately by, "Go to sleep." The sun must have come up eventually. The scratching eventually stopped. We heard my mom come to get us, this time actually hearing footsteps. We absolutely refused to leave the room. My mom had to go get the property owner and have him take the door off. When we saw it was actually her, I burst into tears again. We never had any experiences like this again and eventually moved away, but that night still haunts me. I still refuse to go out at night unless I'm with a bunch of people, and I will never ever live in the woods again. And that's it.
Oh my god.
Oh,
what's wrong?
I fucking
Good night. Go to bed.
Dude, I know. They did mention one little thing. The worst part, that it was completely different intonation with the "what's wrong" and "go to sleep." Kind of like taking 2 different sentences out of 2 different scenes of a TV show of the same person talking. So it'd be like, "What's wrong?" or "Go to sleep." Like things like that. Yep. Dude.
I mean, that's definitely what what was insinuated, and that is so creepy. And that, like, the dog that was like,
I know.
It kind of started out a little scary with the way they were describing the scene, because for some people I feel like that's hard to imagine, but there being like a trailer with no electric and then this little building in the side, I could totally picture that.
Mm-hmm.
That would be scary.
Yeah. Like, I mean, even going, like, where we grew up, you kind of lived in the middle of nowhere, and like it gets pitch black. If there's not a moon out, you can't see. Like, I mean, if there's no lights, I just can't imagine like The worst thing for me, I think, is like the mimicking. Is like if I can't imagine seeing like one of you guys, but you're like just like standing there completely unresponsive, or like hearing your voice but like fucked up, like it's like someone's trying to be you, you know. Just shit myself, bro.
Yeah, that story definitely made me uncomfortable a couple times. I was like, oh my god.
Yup.
Scary.
Hope y'all are getting spooked right now.
Scary.
Shivers are real. I get the goosebumps every once in a while. Even when I'm reading, I'm just like, oh.
I the next one that I picked out, it's been a couple days since I read it, so I kind of forgot what happened. But
Even better, we'll experience it together.
exactly, like I did like lightly skim through both of them. That way, I was equally surprised whenever I reread it. But the reason I picked this next story is because it reminds me of a book that I'm reading right now called You.
Ooh.
And it's by Caroline Kepnes. They made a show based on it, but it just kind of reads like this book does, and it creeps me out. So I hope that you guys get the heebie-jeebies too.
Let's get the heebie-jeebies together.
This is a short one.
Nice.
So this story is called The Florist, and it starts with snip. Ah yes, the clipping of a single leaf could lift an arrangement from mediocre to spectacular. My smile grew as I took in my masterpiece. Not a single petal or leaf out of place, the flowers curling delicately together like they grew that way. I took a final inhale before applying my mask. The scent was so sweet, almost intoxicating. Almost perfect, I murmured lovingly to the blooms, my now gloved hands caressing the petals and leaves. Almost. I pull out the small glass vial, but check my mask before I uncork it. It looks so dainty and delicate in my hand, yet its power is mighty. A drop slips between pink rose petals, another soaks into the heart of a Gerbera daisy, and a final one settles into a frilly carnation. Now, I whisper, the glass vial clinking back into its place amongst my tools. You're perfect now. The arrangement was pink, vibrant, and full of life. The perfect gift for a perfect young girl from her perfect father. Are you done yet? A sharp voice interrupts my thoughts. Dr. Robertson is waiting. Just wrapping up, I call back cheerfully, not bothering to glance behind me at the girl who worked at the cash register. All I'd see is bored eyes rolling back in a boring face. Teenagers always thought they ruled the world. I took my time wrapping the arrangement. First a protective plastic covering, and then the bright wrapping paper topped with a frilly pink bow. The wrapping itself was a piece of art, the perfect concealment for the bouquet underneath. The good doctor did not like to wait. That much was clear by the way he grumbled about it when I presented him with the package. How do I know it's even good? He looked down on me critically, but I returned his look with a pleasant smile. If it isn't, you know where to call. He all but ignored my response, paying and leaving the shop quickly. I glanced at the girl by the cash, who didn't notice as she texted away on her phone. I'm all done, I said. She barely acknowledged me. I took a deep breath when I left the shop, knowing I didn't have long to get where I wanted to go next. I walked quickly, making my way to one of the nicer restaurants in town, the kind where you needed a reservation. For one, I made a reservation for 5:30. I gave my name and was seated at my small table. I took in a small, fake rose stuck in a glass vase, critically, and wrinkled my nose. Nice place indeed. Luckily, I had a good view. It didn't take long for a large table, festooned with pink decorations, to fill with guests. The star of the party seated herself at the head of the table, cozying into the chair like it was her throne. A pile of presents laid before her, a familiar package right near the front. Daddy, her voice was clipped, high and bratty. I want to open these now before dinner. Of course, sweetheart, he said, and everyone turned to her eagerly. I almost scoffed. She was a child, barely 14, and she ran the adults at the table like they were puppets. Her eyes moved greedily over the presents before her, and my wrapping had done the trick because her greedy little hands reached for that purse. Oh, I know what these are. She smiled at her father, the good doctor, and opened the package carefully. It was their tradition, apparently, for her to get flowers from her doting old daddy every year on her birthday. They're so pretty. I smiled, admiring my work even now at a distance. The flowers really were lovely, and my smile grew when she lowered her face into the blooms, inhaling deeply. Oh, roses are my favorite. She plucked up the largest rose, my favorite one in the bouquet, and sniffed deeply. My smile grew even larger. She tore into the next parcel, some designer sweater that made her squeal, but at the next she shook her head a little as if clearing it. I watched her pink cheeks growing paler, and she looked at her dad with big eyes before suddenly collapsing on the table into a fit, her mouth foaming. I sat back, satisfied, watching as the chaos unfolded in the restaurant. While everybody was in the midst of panic, I slipped away, heading home now to pour myself a celebratory glass of wine. I sat in my daughter's room, smoothing my hands over her blankets and holding her favorite stuffed bear on my lap. I wondered what Dr. Robertson was thinking, what he was feeling. The loss of a child is unlike any other. I knew better than anybody. Thanks to his careless misdiagnosis of my beautiful little girl's illness, and now he would know my pain as well. He could carry the burden of loss, just like I did. I finished my glass of wine slowly, looking around my daughter's room before retreating to my own. I had work to do the next day, the next week. My time would be filled with flower arrangements and bouquets. I saw TV on in my workspace through the week, turned into the news station. What a tragedy for a popular family, their daughter taken from them so suddenly. The coroner was struggling to find the cause, but I had done my work well. It had taken me years to develop the right formula, potent but hard to trace. A lot of small animals were buried in my backyard. There was a graveyard of all the test subjects. As I sat and watched Dr. Robertson tearfully give a short interview on the local news channel, yet another order came in for Saturday. A big pink bouquet, a gift to give in sympathy to the grieving family. I smiled and got to work. Hundreds of flowers would be shipped out on Saturday, along with my own special touch. I'm not ignorant, though. I know that something like this would gather attention, and I know that it will likely be traced to me. One dead girl is nothing, but an entire church of mourners? That will catch everybody's attention. It's alright, though. I have a plan. The flowers will be ready to ship Friday, and then I will return home. I feel at peace with the revenge I've gotten, and I'm ready to slip away and join my daughter, wherever she is. Yes, I realize I won't be around to see the results of my work, but that doesn't matter now. I saw what I needed to see in Dr. Robertson's eyes already, and that makes me happy. For now, though, I have to get back to work. There is way too much greenery among these beautiful pink flowers. Smith.
Dude, that gave me goosebumps still.
And
That was like, I liked how that was written. You're right. That was like very poetic almost.
yeah, and he kind of seems like a little... At first, when I was reading, I was like, this guy's a psychopath, and then I was like, oh, that's what happened. Like, the doctor is actually a bad person.
I mean, yeah, and he's like, he could still be a psychopath, but like, we're like sympathetic. We're like, okay,
Yeah,
sure.
I forgive him.
You know what? You do you, boo. That's fine.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness, let's see. I think I want to do this one probably. I had two that I was like debating between, but I like this one. Okay. So this one is by user Z Chaupt from Reddit, and it's on r/no-sleep, so you know it's about to be good. Growing up in Arizona, myths and legends are part of life. Native traditions, mystic places, vortexes, UFO abductions, and dozens of other stories of the unknown that I always found fascinating. I grew up spending a lot of time wandering around the desert and the mountains, hunting, camping, etc., so I felt very at home in the wilderness. One late spring day, on one of my many hiking adventures, I wandered off trail and after several hours came upon a small group of old mud adobe houses. A few people heard me coming and came out of their houses to investigate, and after apparently making the collective decision that I was not a threat, one of the elders dressed in old-style traditional native clothing and a headdress came over to greet me. The man spoke slowly and told me that I had wandered onto a Navajo reservation and asked me if I was lost or if I needed help. When I told him no, I was lost, but intentionally, he chuckled and invited me in to eat with his family. The next several hours were one of the great experiences of my life. The whole thing was like being thrown back in time. While we ate and talked, others from the surrounding houses began to come over and join us, and I got the feeling they didn't get many outside visitors. We shared stories for hours about life, family, their history in the area, and the time spent in the wild, and the longer we talked, the more they opened up and the more interesting the elders' stories got. Throughout the time, there was one man who never spoke. He just sat out of the circle listening and watching me. At one point, I told them I did what I called my walkabouts every year around September, where I would go out by myself into the wilderness for 2 to 4 weeks at a time, and this got the attention of the one silent old man. When I finished, he came over to the circle around the fire and sat directly on the ground in front of me and asked me to join him on the ground. He told me that years ago he used to do the same thing, and went on to tell me about the canyon he went to. He described it as a dangerous but magic place, and that I would see the world differently if I came back. If? Must be for dramatic effect. When he finished, he invited me over to his home. The house was small, and through an open door in the back room, I could see it was filled with various wild animal pelts, coyotes and wolves mostly. He walked over and closed that door, and then picked up and handed me an old map and some written directions that seemed like he had been holding on to for a long time. And he just walked away into the back room and closed the door behind him. It was late, and one of the families had invited me to stay the night, which I gladly did. The next morning, as I prepared to leave, one of the old women came over to me with something in her hands. She handed me a talisman and simply said, "Dip your bullets in the white ash at the hottest part of the fire," and then just walked away. September came and I packed up for my walkabout. I saw the talisman in a drawer and something felt right about taking it with me. After a beautiful drive, I was happy to find the Forest Service road marked on the old map. The entrance to the area was remote and overgrown and tough to get to even in my Jeep, and it took me much longer to get than I expected. So I decided to make camp and start the hike in the morning. After a few hours on a trail that looked like it had been forgotten, I came to a stream and the entrance to the secret valley. It was a narrow crack in the tall cliffs with about 4 feet of water running gently through, but too narrow for a kayak or canoe. I hoisted my gear over my head and began to wade sideways through the chest-deep water. The crack in the cliffs seemed to go on forever, but after almost 2 hours, I came to the place where it opened up into a small lake in an incredible valley surrounded by tall rock faces. This may have been the most remote place I'd ever been, in the sense that there was no sign that people had ever been there. No trash, no bullet casings, not even the evidence of campfires. My first night there was the quietest night I've ever spent in the wild. No birds, no frogs, not even crickets, but it didn't feel like I was alone there. In the morning after breakfast, I headed out on my first exploratory hike to explore my new home for the next couple weeks. After being stalked by a mountain lion on a hike about 10 years ago, I made a point of now bringing a pistol with me when I'm out wilderness hiking. After some looking around, I found a narrow path that appeared to be a game trail that led up the side of one of the cliffs and towards what looked like caves from the canyon floor. I made my way up to them and came upon an entrance that was much larger than it appeared from below. I made some noise to alert any possible animals I was there and made my way inside. The cave was an expansive single chamber that went back a couple 100 feet. As I walked, I inspected as much as I could see with my light, but there were no tracks of any kind in the dirt besides mine, so I decided I was alone in there and pushed on towards the rear of the cave. As I came around the last bend in the cave and approached the end, my headlamp panned across a large pile of bones. Some animal, some human, and a very old-looking small candle sitting on a natural stone shelf. This is the first thing that has scared me in as long as I can remember. But focusing my wits, I remembered that there were no tracks in the cave, and I figured it was all from a very long time ago. I was still a little uneasy as I exited the cave and ready to go back to camp. As I came out into the light, about 75 feet away, there was the largest wolf I had ever seen that looked like it was coming down from standing on its hind legs. It dropped to all fours on a rock and just began staring at me, not growling or baring its teeth, just staring. I pulled my .45 and fired 2 shots off to the side of it to scare it away, but it didn't even flinch. Not only have I never seen a wolf in this part of northern Arizona, but I have never seen a wild animal that did not at least flinch at the sound of a gunshot. We both stood there staring at each other for a moment. I turned and set my backpack down to grab my binoculars and get a closer look, but when I turned back, the wolf was gone. I made my way cautiously down the path back towards camp. I have encountered wolves before, and usually it's not the one wolf that you can see that should worry you, but the ones that you can't see. So I was extra cautious for the return trip. Back at camp, I made sure my gun was fully loaded and got my recurve bow strung just in case the wolves came back. I've seen plenty of predatory animals on my adventures. It's a part of being in the wilderness, so I wasn't too worried. I just prepared myself the best I could and went over to the lake to go fishing. Within about 20 minutes, I caught 2 of the biggest brown trout I've ever caught, so I decided to stop fishing for the day and take a swim. Back at camp, I made a fire, cleaned my trout, and made dinner while the sun went down. As soon as the sun went down, all the life in the canyon seemed to go silent again. As I put my fire and prepared for bed, I noticed there was a small flicker of light coming from the area where the cave I had explored earlier up the cliffside, which didn't make sense. It was a moonless night, and stars don't reflect that way. It couldn't have been the candle I had seen. It was too old and would not have burned so bright. I decided to keep my gun close and try to get some sleep. I would investigate the cave again the next day. When I woke at sunrise, there was a haze along the ground throughout the whole canyon floor, but as the sun rose, it disappeared quickly, and the area came back to life. I made my breakfast, gathered my gun and bow, and headed back towards the cave. When I reached the entrance, I saw there were still no tracks besides mine around the entrance, and decided to push up the hill further. Just a little further up, I came upon the entrance to another cave, much smaller than the first one. There was a small flat landing with a large, heavily twisted juniper tree that, to my absolute surprise, had many small objects hanging from thin, old-looking ropes tied to the branches. There were bones, but there were also old things definitely made by humans, and looked like they were old Native American artifacts. Thinking I might have found the spot where the old man had been on the reservation had stayed when he was there decades ago, I went into the cave. This cave was much different from the first one. Just a few feet in, I noticed the walls were covered in what looked like ceremonial cave paintings. As I pushed further back, the cave got dramatically colder, much colder than it should have been, and the walls were completely covered with the paintings the entire way. When I reached the back of the cave, I was not prepared for what I saw. There was what looked like an old altar made of wood and bones. As I looked around, I saw that a little before the back of the cave, there was another shaft in the ceiling that went up, and on a ledge about 25 feet up sat a small figure of what appeared to be a woman. She was small and pale with her face painted white and wearing something like a crown made of woven branches with two small antlers in the front. I stopped and stared for a few minutes, and the figure did not move, so I assumed it was mummified remains from a long time ago. Not wanting to disturb a burial site, I turned and walked back out of the cave. But I began to walk, and I heard what sounded like a faint voice in an unknown ancient language. I instinctively looked back up towards the figure, but it was gone. I was immediately terrified and ran from the cave as fast as I could get out, but my headlamp flickered and died. I made my way out, feeling along the wall to find my way, and the whole way I felt like there was something right behind me. When I saw the first light from the cave entrance, I began to sprint towards it. Just before I made it out, I looked back and there was nothing, so I slowed down, but I could still hear the faint voice, and the volume never changed. When I got outside, all the bones and artifacts hanging from the tree were gone. I ran down the path as fast as I could, headed back to my campsite by the lake. Oh, you good, Artie? Just as I reached the floor of the canyon, I noticed the large wolf at the tree line to my left, but this time it stayed standing upright on its hind legs. I stopped running, hoping not to initiate its predatory response to chase me, and again it just stood there on its hind legs, staring at me. I reached my campsite safely and immediately began packing up. It was too late in the day to make it out before dark, and I did not want to make the hike out at night with all that was going on. I moved my tent so it would be back up against the canyon wall by the crack, so in the cliffside, so I didn't have to worry about anything sneaking up behind me. I built my fire much larger and knew I wasn't going to get any sleep that night. Just as the sun was going down, I began to hear noises coming from the trees, and I felt like I was being hunted. Finally, in the last light of day, I saw the wolf slowly walking around by where the path led out of the trees and began to slowly walk towards me. This time I drew my gun and fired towards the creature, intending to hit it. And while I saw a couple hit the dirt around it, several bullets hit. Several rounds from a .45 will slow down anything I've ever encountered, but this giant wolf kept walking towards me like nothing had happened. I continued to fire at it until the inevitable click of an empty magazine. I reached out and fumbled around in my backpack looking for my other magazine to reload, and as I lifted it, the talisman the old woman gave me fell out onto the ground. I picked it up and put it around my neck and immediately remembered what she had told me. Dip your bullets in the white ash. I looked around but didn't see my backup magazine, so I grabbed my bow, pulled an arrow that was tipped with a hunting broadhead and dipped it into the white ashes, drew and fired. I hit the creature just in front of its right hip, and it let out a noise somewhere between a growl and a person screaming that made my blood curdle. I can hear that noise in my head to this day. It immediately turned and ran back to the trees. In the flicker of the firelight, I saw the small woman with the antler crown standing there waiting for it. They both retreated into the trees, and for the rest of the night, I could hear the same faint voice I had heard in the cave. I spent the night outside of my tent as awake as I have ever been, but no longer afraid, and at dawn, I finished packing up so I could get out of the canyon. The next spring, I went back to the small group of houses on the Navajo reservation I had found the year before. I was wearing the talisman as a necklace, and the first person to greet me was the woman who had given it to me, and she ran up to give me a big hug. "You heard me," was all she said. I asked the group about the man who had given me the map, as I was almost desperate to talk to him about the experience I had so I could compare it with his own. They told me that he had disappeared shortly after I had visited the first time, and had not been back. Strangely, when I tried to tell them what had happened to me, no one would let me tell the story, and the oldest man there, who sat in the corner, kept mumbling the words, "I-na-de-lu-shi." I don't know if I said that right, but that's what it is. We all once again sat and shared other stories of life and a meal. Before I left the next morning, I found the old woman who had given me the talisman and offered it back to her. She smiled and told me I had a good heart, and then just closed my hands around it, telling me to keep it to watch over my next walkabout. I went back to the small village on a reservation several times over the next 10 years or so until I moved to Oregon, but they never let me tell them what happened. I never went back to the canyon, and while curiosity sometimes gets the best of me, I don't think I ever will. So,
Oh my god.
I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but I-na-de-lu-shi is essentially it's a skinwalker. That's like the Navajo word for skinwalker. So the guy who had all the pelts and stuff, their legend was about this creature was that they would use pelts to like become that creature. So it was really taboo to have pelts because it was associated strictly with like witchcraft and stuff. And like, so this guy had a room full of pelts in his back room, and then he was never seen.
Oh my god.
Dude.
Well, yeah. That also makes me wonder if like he was the one, like the animal that he
I think he
shot
was.
at.
I think he was.
I didn't think skinwalker though. I thought like werewolf, but skinwalker makes more sense.
Dude, yeah. And then because I was reading up on some of the lore, and they were also talking about on the J&J podcast, and like you're not supposed to, if you talk about the experience like that happened to you basically, like, or if you like hear, you can potentially, according to their legends, like get the attention of the skinwalker redirected onto you if you're like actively going and talking about it.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Dude, no, there was one that they did on the J&J podcast, and I couldn't find it, but it was this girl. They like had like a summer home in the middle of Montana basically, and she had 3 dogs, 2 big dogs and a tiny dog, and she was up late that night and the dogs needed to go potty, so she let him out back. She didn't see him for like the little one for a second, but then she heard the little one barking over by the woods, so she goes over and she's calling the dog's name. Well, then suddenly her 2 big dogs come up beside her and start growling at the woods, and she turns around and her little dog is behind her, but she still hears it in front of her, and then she like sprints inside with them. And I was like, there was one that was also where this girl was at home and she heard her dog outside, and she was like, oh, she must have went outside to go potty and now she like needs back in. She couldn't remember letting her dog outside though. She opens the door and her dog is standing like at the bottom of the stairs, like barking at her, but it sounds weird. She's like, come on, like she was like sleepy, and she like started to go towards the dog when suddenly her actual dog, like slams against the door and is like snarling at the door at the thing at the bottom of the stairs. Like she said she's never heard her dog sound like this before. And so her dog was at the bottom of the stairs, but her dog was in the house snarling at the thing at the bottom. I'm like, huh? No. Yep. Dude, I got the amount of skinwalker stories they told, I got so into it. I was like, this fucked up. I was like, I love these stories. They're so fucked up.
Hey, picky about scary stories, and sometimes if it's like too like deep in fantasy, I'm just like out of it. I'm like, I'm not sold on it.
Yeah.
But I feel like those stories that you told were very convincing.
Same. Like that's the kind of story that gets me. Not the ones where I'm like, okay, whatever, dude. Like, yeah, sure, all right. Aliens. But these ones, I'm like, I just feel like it could happen. I feel like,
yeah.
And some of them claim to be true, like, so it's like
exactly. Those sound like stories I've heard before, like
right. And that's the thing. I feel like sometimes you just like hear in passing from people who don't want to talk about it. They're like, yeah, no, I had a really weird experience one time where like this wolf like stand up and stared at me and was like, it didn't quite sound like a wolf, but I just left. And like most of the time I feel like kind of like in your first story where people were just like, hey, I know you said you saw an owl in that barn. Don't go in there. I don't know why. Just don't do it. Like I feel like sometimes we have that deep gut instinct that's just like, leave, just go. Just walk away.
Mm-hmm.
Which people in horror movies
Mhm.
don't seem to have that instinct for some reason.
Yeah, we don't have common sense.
They're like, leave? No, I'm gonna go in. I know you said it's haunted and I saw like a figure and there was a knife and a scream. I'm gonna go in. I'm gonna go have fun.
Yeah. That was your guy in the last story going into the cave with the bones. He was like, you know what? Spooky cave? Sign me up.
You know what? I'm gonna fuck around and find out.
And he did.
He did. He did indeed find out. Oh my god. But yeah, those were our spooky little story time. I hope you guys enjoyed. I really haven't done a video format like this before, but I know that I enjoy like just listening to videos sometimes and just like while I'm doing other things or like while I'm driving. I love a podcast type video. I don't know why I like having the YouTube aspect up so I can just see them talking, but like I do. So I was like, I'm gonna make a little spooky time. What'd you think of the spooky stories?
I thought it was a super good idea. I had a lot of fun, like, picking stories. I got to read a lot of stories on my
Yeah.
way, like, doing this. So, and with it being October and Halloween, like, it was, like, just what I needed. It was like having a
Right.
cup of hot chocolate with that's
It
all
really
you want.
was. If you guys, listen to this and you get the itch, just like go to like r/no sleep or something, or like any sort of Reddit and just sort by top all time, and you'll just find some really banger stories to read.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
some good ones out there.
And, like, I would say let us know if you want us to do this again.
Oh
'Cause
yeah,
I'd be down.
I'd be down. Even if we find like we could do other type of story, we could do like weird stories. We could do like any sort of things. We could. I love it. But you guys should definitely check out Hailey's content. Again, I will link it in the description. And I hope you guys have a fantastic Halloween. Hailey, do you have any closing words?
Thank you so much for having me on your channel.
Of course, it was fun. Yeah. If you guys want to do it
Happy
again,
Halloween.
you know what to do. Yeah, happy Halloween, everybody. Leave a like, leave a comment, tell us you want more, and we'll do it. I mean, I loved this. This was fun. I even like turned my LED lights to orange, and I was like, I'm gonna turn off the backlight. I'm gonna make it look a
Spooky vibe.
little spooky in my room, All right. Well, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.